She is the sweet, naughty, and curvaceous animated character, and her name is Betty Boop. Born to America in the 1920s, she steadfastly became the girl that everyone came out to see. In her life on the screen, she faced many moral and political issues, and even became a controversial figure. Betty was way ahead of her time. And though her days as a film star ended long ago, she's never lost her popularity.
Boop-boop-a-doo. 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 Boop-boop and do.
We want Betty. We want Betty. Betty, Betty, Betty.
It's New York, and there's a new star in town. She's just a little gal who packs a big ball of talent in a big way. Everyone needs to know, who is this pixie of pandemonium?
That'll make an interesting story for my paper. Mr. Fleischer, can you let me see how Betty Boop does her stuff?
Yes, I'll have her ready for you in just a moment.
Okay.
And I'll have her go through some of the stuff for you.
Fine.
If you want to see just perfect little she, wait till you get a view of sweet Betty.
They called it the Roaring Twenties for a reason. Everything about the era made a big noise. Flaming youth and prohibition defined this time of self-expression and exploration. Amid this spontaneity and fresh approach to life, music, and the arts, came a new art form that would sweep the country and later the world. Animated films, or as we commonly refer to them today, cartoons. No one studio was considered to be more at the forefront of this revolution in this new film experience than the New York City-based Fleischer Studios. It was here the cartoon was being readied and perfected for our darling Betty Boop. The genius and artistry of Max Fleischer and his brother Dave changed the animated film forever.
My father was a great artist, and Dave was the kind of gag man. He worked with the writers, and he was a wonderful guy.
The Fleischer brothers were raised in Brownsville, a very poor immigrant section of New York City, but they were great believers in the American dream. Even as a young man, Max loved cartooning. He drew his first comic strip for the Brooklyn Daily Eagle in 1902. When Max Fleischer joined the Popular Science magazine in 1906, his publisher immediately recognized his true potential.
And he encouraged my father to put his various talents and skills together to make cartoons more graceful.
Early cartoons had a jerky, unnatural look and feel to them. They were hard to watch because of their poor quality. It was the poor quality of these films that eventually led Max, Dave, and brother Joe in 1915 to invent a new way of cartooning that revolutionized animation. The invention of the rotoscope became one of the key patents in animation. Footage of an actor going through a motion would be projected onto a drawing board and used as a guide by the animator to bring to life the characters. This gave a much smoother and more lifelike quality to the motion. Dave Fleischer, dressed in a black and white clown outfit, was filmed in the first rotoscope experiments. That was the beginning of the Out of the Inkwell cartoon series featuring Coco the Clown. These silent cartoons were shown before the feature attraction, thrilling theater audiences around the country with a new form of entertainment.
Now who'll buy Jippo? Huh? No?
Max's studio was involved with Talking Motion Pictures. With their very popular musical series Follow the Bouncing Ball, audiences could sing along with stars like Ethel Merman.
I'll try somebody else, and when we do, we'll both be blue and be back together again.
When sound films hit the country in a big way, Max and Dave were faced with a new competitor. Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse.
We are tough, you bet.
The success of the series generally relied on the ownership of a popular character.
The Fleischers went to work with their own animators to find such a star.
B-O. Bimbo.
They created a dog named Bimbo, which was not very successful. Max Fleischer then decided they needed to create a character that could be a real partner for Bimbo, give him a little oomph, an appeal he definitely lacked. Betty Boop made her on-screen debut in 1930. The part was small, but it did give her an opportunity to show off her musical talents in a little film called Dizzy Dishes.
I have to have love, but when I'm having my love, I have to have boo-boo-ba-doo-be-doo. I'm so blue.
Betty was playing an unnamed nightclub singer who tries to win the affections of Bimbo. She used every frame of the film to her advantage. She had the talent, and she had that certain intangible quality all stars have. What she didn't have were the looks. She just didn't look like a star.
The body was somewhat human, but the face was definitely a rather ugly dog face.
While the Fleischers were trying to develop their new character, they also knew she would need a voice that would appeal to audiences.
Hello, Betsy. Maybe you could give out a little imitation from me. No.
They held a contest to find local talent.
I got the pork and the bench and the bench and the pork and
The finalists included Kate Wright, Little Ann Little, and May Castell.
Mr. Fleischer, as the originator of Betty Boop, what is your reason for selecting these girls to furnish the voice for your Betty Boop cartoons?
Because they were all born with a certain something in their voices.
But it was teenager May Castell's spontaneous wit and talent that convinced the Fleischers that hers would be Betty's signature sound.
You can say our voices are awful, or our songs are too risque, but take our boo-boo-be-doo,
Now, do you get the idea?
Over the next 2 years, a remarkable and very pleasant change took place with Betty's look and character. The long dog ears became feminine hoop earrings. The animal snout is replaced with a tiny nose, and the body is more than human. It's all Betty.
Wait a minute, it's coming your way.
Here comes the old ragman.
It's 1932, and Betty gets top billing in the film Any Rags. To the audiences watching and listening, there isn't any doubt. They have found a star. They have found their sweet Betty.
There's a little queen on the animated screen. Wait till you get a view of sweet Betty, made of pen and ink. She can win you with a wink. Wait till you get a view of sweet Betty. Those eyes, that pretty nose, and oh, aside from this, she's got so much of those. If you want to see just a perfect little she, wait till you get a view of sweet Betty. Made of pen and ink, she can win you with a wink. Ain't she cute? Sweet Betty.
Betty's star was on the rise, and it was only 1932. She was the first and only female animated screen star who could do it all. Drama, musicals,
You got to learn my song.
I got to learn your song.
and comedy.
Look at me, oh, look at me, oh, ho. I'm an Indian, aha, I'm an Indian.
Betty was more than an actress. She was a phenomenon, taking the country by storm and straight into their hearts.
Oh, dear, what a busy day this has been. Let's see, where do I go from here? Got a language of my own, known in every foreign...
Betty had a flair all her own. She could be daring and assertive, all the while keeping that coquettish innocence her public loved.
She was on her own. She was not a homebody, as most women were at that time. Betty was out working, earning a living. She was a city girl.
That's all right, Betty. How about a little kiss?
Naughty, naughty.
In Betty's Big Boss, after being chased around her boss's office, she gets even with him.
And she finally ends up calling the police.
In a time when women's rights were unheard of, Betty took the high moral ground, and the entire nation came to her aid.
Chop it down, boys.
The Fleischers' world was more of an adult world, and it dealt with adult concerns about making a living, which were certainly very important during the Depression era.
Betty was willing to throw her hat and her talents into the political arena in the satirical film Betty Boop for President.
Some of you have money, while some are poor, you know. If you send me to Washington, I'll just divide the dough. Oh, when I'm the president.
When I'm the president, I'll handle all the money. When I'm the president.
What this country is in need of is a lot of hidey-ho, boop-a-doops and chocolate ice cream.
We say yes.
And we say no.
Now we will give things for nothing, movies, cabarets, and jazz.
We accept it.
We reject it.
You're an elephant.
You're an ass.
Yeah.
Betty's performances were only enhanced by the Fleischers' unique renderings, which came to be known as the New York style of animation.
Hey, what is it? Well.
Ironically, while Max Fleischer did invent the rotoscope, which enabled more lifelike animation, Max, in principle, felt that animation should do what cannot be done in live action. So consequently, the Fleischer films tend to have bizarre and surreal imagery.
The anthropomorphic element, if you don't mind a fancy word, which is something very popular today. which is inanimate objects becoming animate. That was a big stylistic thing for Fleischer Studios.
Darling, I am growing older.
Goodness gracious me.
Give the little girl a big hand.
As Betty rocketed toward stardom, friends and co-stars rode her coattails. While Coco the Clown and Betty were dear friends on screen and off, her relationship with Bimbo was more than a little strange. It was a lot strange. Miscast from the beginning, Betty's character had grown, and she became America's sweetheart. Bimbo remained a lecherous dog, a real dog.
Holy smack!
Bimbo, in some of the films, is obviously very much in love with Betty Boop. But it's a pure relationship, I presume.
The Fleischer Studios and the Hollywood community began to wonder if Bimbo was worth the trouble.
Want to be a member? Want to be a member?
No.
Bimbo had problems. The studio was looking to replace the crusty little hound.
Hello, May. I've got a bone to pick with you.
Bimbo had cause to worry. He seemed to have more enemies than friends. It was head animator Myron Waldman who was given the task of trying to find or create a replacement for Betty's Bimbo.
Bimbo was a big mutt, and he spoke, and he didn't go well with Betty Boop, you know.
There's the way out.
I was tickled silly because I never liked him.
But Uncle Max still believed in Betty and Betty's talent. He knew just what his star needed. Surround her with more stars.
The rotoscope was often used to incorporate guest appearances by famous music and entertainment celebrities in the Betty Boop cartoons.
The Fleischer Studios paired Betty and Cab Calloway in 3 major films together. Betty, the steamy siren of animation, and Calloway, the hot jazz man.
He had a unique style, not only of singing, but of body movement. He did very strange, kind of odd dance steps when he sang, and everybody knew them. They were really popular. So when my father decided to make the pictures with Cab Calloway, he used the rotoscope. So underneath the cartoon of Cab Calloway is Cab Calloway, actually doing the steps. And when he saw it for the first time, my father told me he fell off his seat laughing.
Folks, now here's a story about Minnie the Moocher. She was a red-hot hoochie coocher. She was the roughest, toughest frail.
The audiences would go wild, and they'd applaud so much that the theater owners would have to repeat these wonderful musical cartoons. The singing sensations of the day would co-star with Fleischer's Boop Oop a Doop Girl. Ethel Merman, Lillian Roth,
Hi-ho, everybody.
and Rudy Valley were among those superstars who sang and danced in Betty Boop films.
Nice way, of course.
If starring with the top musical stars of the day was good for Betty, it was even better for Paramount Pictures, who was also the distributor of Fleischer Films.
Rock, rock, keep a little song handy wherever you go, and nothing can ever go wrong.
Paramount not only produced films, but they had a huge music division that promoted and distributed their own music.
In fact, the way these films were seen in their time is probably most like the way we look at rock videos today.
I've got a few songs familiar to you, all of them popular too. And here's one thing you can do.
These sing-alongs were a huge success.
A hot cornet can go sounding hot and blue. But
Moviegoers flocked to theaters to enjoy both their favorite musical artist and their newfound star, Betty Boop.
what a saxophone can like Betty Boop can do. This little miss would never miss a chance for vocal tuning. And anytime and anywhere you can hear this lady crooning. An old banjo can go. That's no news to you, but an old banjo can't boop boop a doop like Betty Boop can da 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 da.
In the 1930s, audiences enjoyed their sweet and sometimes naughty Betty.
You got to ho-dee-ho.
You gotta ho-dee-ho.
You got to hi-dee-hi.
You gotta hi-dee-hi.
And when she was teamed with the top musical stars of the day, everyone hummed along with her.
Yeah, man, how
You have to remember that in the 1930s, these films were shown to general audiences.
They were never cartoons made for children. They were always cartoons that were meant for adults. And of course that got them in trouble later on.
Not bad. What can you do?
Well, I'm not so good in a crowd, but when you get me alone, you'd be surprised. I don't know how to try to write, but oh, if you take me home, you'd be surprised. I'm sorry that I'm not a good worker.
Oh.
Don't judge a book by its cover.
Boy.
The cartoons were always a little bit sexy, a little tongue-in-cheek.
I didn't go to a school, but when I sit on your knee, you'd be surprised.
You're hired.
Lots of double entendres that children seeing the picture wouldn't get, adults would.
You have to remember that the people who were animating these films were in their late teens through their 20s, living in New York at the end of the Prohibition era. These were people who were filled with the sap of life, and that certainly shows in the films.
When your sweetie tells you everything will be okay, just keep it the bop and the good news, get a big hip the bop the bip money.
As filmmakers dared to be daring, it was the theater owners who took the brunt of outraged church groups and audiences. It was 1933, and Hollywood stars, once beacons of gaiety and naughtiness, were being forced to dim their twinkles and put on more clothes by the film industry's new decency and morals watchdog, the Hays Office.
Mae West fell into disfavor because of the Hays Office. They thought she was too sexy. And it even went so far as to censor Betty Boop. If you can imagine such a thing.
They always pick on me. They never let me be. I'm so very lonely. Oh, please, Dad, it's a long time since you've been glad.
The Hays Office kept exerting more and more pressure on the Hollywood film community.
Now we'll have a perfect country. These improvements you will see.
In fact, the films of the 1930s were being blamed for many of the day's social ills.
Certain groups, the far right, felt movies were getting out of hand. Doesn't it sound familiar?
The Hays office insisted that Betty lose the style and the fashion that had made her so endearing. Short skirts, low tops, so lovable, so Betty.
By the time they finished, Betty was looking like a schoolmarm, and the cartoon and the character began to lose its popularity.
But giving in and giving up was not the style of the tough New York Fleischer Studios or of Betty Boop.
Come on, Uncle Max. Give me a lift.
The strategy was to bring our cartoon sweetheart into the homes and the hearts of America by giving Betty her own popular radio program and Sunday comic strip. To keep moving ahead, Max decided to use the popularity of their Queen of Hearts to introduce a new cinematic personality, Popeye, in a film entitled Betty Boop and Popeye the Sailor. The improvisational style of Betty's films worked even better with Popeye. With another success on their hands, Max had a renewed determination to keep Betty's star burning brightly. By 1936, Betty was fast becoming an international superstar as the Fleischers took her around the world. In fact, she would become so popular in Japan that they decided Betty Boop would give a special performance in the film A Language All My Own. The Fleischer animators were exceptionally sensitive about portraying the Japanese culture in a playful and yet respectful way.
I checked at International House, Columbia University. Then they had a few Japanese students. I didn't want to do anything obscene with the fans, see?
The studio decided to give Betty an opportunity to stretch as an actress. Instead of playing the boop-boop-a-doop girl, she was given well-known character roles such as Snow White. Betty played this part brilliantly. The animators achieved a new level of artistic excellence by retelling the classic Snow White fairy tale.
I want to see my stepmama, stepmama, stepmama. I want to see my stepmama.
Our stepmama, the queen.
While lauded by audiences and critics alike, true appreciation of this Fleischer cartoon would take more than 60 years to be realized.
I've heard about your looking glass.
What it says is so.
Magic mirror in my hand, who's the fairest in the land?
The National Film Registry eventually bestowed its greatest honor by naming Snow White among the 25 greatest pictures ever made.
Off with her head.
Let her go, oh bless her. Wherever she may be, she will search this wide world over. but you never find another sweet man like me.
Magic mirror in my hand now. Who's the fairest in the land?
You're the fairest in the land.
Even with all her successes, Betty would only be as good as her last picture. The Fleischers had to keep reinventing their darling Betty or risk her eventual demise. The studio kept asking, how do we keep Betty from getting swallowed by the competition?
Made of pen and ink, she can win you with a wink. Ain't she cute? Sweet Betty.
The moral watchdogs at the Hayes office were watching her every move. But Betty was working harder than ever to keep these critics at bay. And Max Fleischer was always thinking of new ways to keep his Betty on top. When the costly Technicolor process was developed, Max decided he wanted to produce in color too. Since the cost was prohibitive, Max developed his own colorization process in 1934 and added a three-dimensional way of shooting called 3D Cinecolor.
He invented his own system called the setback system of cartooning, where the backgrounds were shot in 3 dimensions.
Objects or characters were photographed as cutout figures on different levels or planes. Cartoons were then drawn and positioned in front of the models, which were placed on a rotating table to give the illusion of space and movement. A remarkable effect that gave animated films a whole new style and look.
Goodness gracious me! I forgot all about that mist last night. Oh, but was that a swell party?
Cinecolor is a 2-color process, whatever the basic colors are, let's say red and blue. You have to photograph one with a red filter, and then the same one you have to do again in a blue filter. And then you put the two together, and you get the proper mixture of the colors.
Once again, Betty would be given the honor of introducing this new cinematic sensation by starring in the Fleischer version of that fairy tale classic, Cinderella, featuring the music of the talented composer Sammy Timberg.
I'm just a poor Cinderella. Nobody loves me, it seems.
In her first color film, Betty wowed audiences as a fashionable redhead. Betty put her unique talent and ability to full use. Rudy Valley, the heartthrob crooner, was given the honor of singing the title song in a brief cameo appearance.
Paramount was certainly very eager to promote Rudy Valley through the Betty Boop cartoons.
Hail the Prince!
Most of the animators were not really that keen on Rudy Valley. I've been told by an animator who worked on the films back then that the animators so resented having Rudy Valley in the first color Betty Boop film, Poor Cinderella, that they drew the Rudy Valley character to look as if he isn't wearing any pants.
And like a poor Cinderella, I find my romance in dreams.
Once again, Betty triumphed in this rags to riches story. But sadly, even though she would get the prince, she would never star in another color film again. It's the age-old challenge. Once you've climbed your way to the top, you've got to figure out a way to stay there. Luckily for Betty, she had the full power of the Fleischer Studios behind her. As the Hayes office watched every hemline, Max steered away from controversy.
You go and get your duds on and leave this to me.
Surrounding Betty with new and lovable characters like Grampy, the wacky inventor.
Ah! Oh, no. Hooray! I've got it! He's got it! Ah, pick it
Head animator Waldman was called on to create a lovable dog for Betty.
They said, no, we'll go with the little mutt, who they named Pudgy. He's the only Hollywood star who wasn't found in Schwab's drugstore and discovered.
But most people thought that it was Betty who ended up supporting the cute and playful antics of Pudgy.
You're on next, Miss Boom.
Okay.
Pudgy started getting all the good adventures and storylines. Ironically, Betty's career had taken her from dog starlet to being upstaged by her own pooch. Betty was no longer being run ragged by lecherous characters or running for her life away from wicked queens. Forget worrying about her boop-boop-a-doop.
There'll be no more boop-boop-a-doop out of you.
She was now reduced to more domestic laments like the house cleaning blues.
I've got those house cleaning blues. There's floors to scrub and windows to rub. I've got those house cleaning blues. So much to do, I'll never get through. I'm getting tired of cleaning things, but I'm tied to my apron string.
But audiences no longer were titillated by their cutie with the big eyes. They just couldn't accept Betty worrying more about dishpan hands than preserving her virtue. She was fast becoming Betty the homebody, who cared more about her home than her body.
All over again. I would have to drop those things. I wish people wouldn't smoke so much anyhow.
And like any star, they wear out their welcome after a while.
Betty.
Betty. You have booped your last boop.
Uh-oh. Betty's in trouble again. I have to take a hand in this thing. Come on. Jump. Jump quick.
It was the late 1930s, a different time and a different, more conservative Betty who seemed to lose her relevance with audiences throughout the country. Her career had spanned almost a decade. The boop-boop-a-doop flapper style of the 20s had lost its appeal to men and women looking for stronger heroes who would prepare and inspire them for the 1940s and a world at war. Her last film was released in August of 1939. It was a cartoon short entitled Yip Yip Yippee.
After the series was finished and the Fleischer Studio stopped making Betty Boop cartoons, character lay dormant for many, many years until television started to get very popular and cartoons started to be shown on television.
I'm giving a little party. Come right over, bring the gang. Samantha!
Some say she always knew she'd be back, but who knew she'd be so popular? Many have tried to explain this renewed affection for Betty.
First of all, we do live in an age where women's rights, women's issues are much more on the agenda.
Betty Boop was always ahead of her time, and she handled issues then which are still issues today, particularly in the area of sexual harassment.
In Boop Boop a Doop, the ringmaster propositions Betty, and she pleads to preserve her purity.
Ah, me beauty, at last. Do you like your job? Well, I think if I were you, I'd go somewhere and you better come out with me. No!
I think also that Betty Boop has a kind of sexy, insouciant personality that's very appealing.
After more than 60 years, audiences everywhere have rediscovered the wit, the music, and the charm of Betty Boop. She was always an original talent, and now a new generation is being entertained.
I think she's sexy and sassy, and she was before her time, and I think she reminds me of me.
I always thought she was so cute because she was out of proportion. She had a funny head and a real great body that I always wanted to grow up to look like her.
She's sexy and she's cute, and the stuff is great that they have.
Betty's appeal is evident wherever you go. There are more than 1,000 products being merchandised in stores throughout the world.
This is my most prized possession.
One of the attractions about the character, psychological attraction, was the size of her head. And I've been thinking about that. It seems to me that babies have the same kind of proportion. They have a large head and a small, cute body. And I think when you see Betty Boop, you immediately think of a baby.
Universities and film aficionados are studying the genius and the inventive style of the Fleischer Studio and the New York style of animation.
That gives me a great deal of pleasure to know that Max Fleischer is being remembered and recognized along with his great creation of Betty Boop.
Betty's star appeal has captured our hearts, and it stands as a lasting tribute to all the great animators, musicians, and actors who have given us another chance to smile, to sing, and
Boop-boop-a-doop.
Boop-boop-a-doop.
Boop-boop-be-doop.
Boop-boop-be-doop.
Can't boop-boop-a-doop like Betty Boop can da-da-da-da.
Oh! Well, Mr. Reporter, did you get everything, huh?
Yes, I got everything.
Well, so long, everybody. Boop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doop, boop-boop-be-doop. Boop-boop-be-doop, boop-boop-be-doop. It's the only thing I'll live for. Till the time I'm old and gray. So don't take my boop-boop-be-doop away.
It would grieve me to think that justice is always blind. I hope it won't be so this time.
For the sake of all justice, gentlemen, please be kind. Forgive this little miss her crime. You can take her father's money, make her boyfriends pay and pay, but don't take her. You can lock them all in prison for a lifetime and a day, but don't